Hey, gorgeous people. I'm Alexandra Blair of Nine Lives Astrology. Welcome to my Monday morning coffee chat show where we talk about everything happening under the sun through art and archetype and personal stories and mythologies that you're already living. And we try to do all of that before I have to get up and make myself another cup of coffee. Every week, we meet here to drag astrology out of the dry, dusty old textbooks and breathe real life into it, hopefully making it a little more messy, a little more magical, a little more lived in, unfinished, and unfolding in real time. This week, we have a really exciting final flash for Jupiter in Gemini before Jupiter moves into Cancer at the start of next week. It will conjoin Mercury at 29 Gemini. We also have Venus entering Taurus and Mercury entering Cancer, which we will get into. But first, I want to share with you some of my favorite comments that you guys have left me on YouTube and Instagram over the past week. I have to apologize to everyone in advance. My voice is still wrecked from NORWAC. It was the best of times. It was the best of times. And it was also the best of times. I saw so many incredible talks from so many talented astrologers. My brain is actually still reeling. I'm going to be sharing some thoughts from NORWAC to my Instagram this week and probably to my newsletter as well. And for those of you who don't know, the Northwest Astrology Conference, lovingly called NORWAC, is a conference that's been happening every year in Seattle for decades at this point, where people gather from across the world to share astrological knowledge. There's a lot of talks, there's a lot of lectures, there's a lot of socializing. There's even an astrological bookstore and vendors who come to show what they have going on. It's an incredibly overstimulating place, and it felt very fitting for last year to be my first time just before Jupiter moved into Gemini. And I have definitely spent this year with my mental wheels spinning, and it felt like kind of a fitting end to go there. So I took a bit of a break off Instagram for NORWAC, except to post chaotic and random things on my stories, which you may have seen. So these are all comments from YouTube. I had so many comments about Jupiter and Gemini and people having different experiences than what many astrologers have talked about. Now, I want to share these comments because I think it's going to be really important to keep in mind as well as Jupiter heads into Cancer. Jupiter functions differently in everybody's chart. If you were born at night, Jupiter, in theory, is not quite as expressive in your chart. And if you have planets in Gemini or any of the mutable signs, Jupiter was actually in a harsh aspect with those placements over the past year. Now, on top of that, we have to consider your natal context with Jupiter. If you have a difficult relationship with Jupiter natally, that is also something important to consider. I'm hitting this point home because Jupiter is about to head into its exaltation of Cancer, and we'll talk a lot more about that on the show next week and how you can find out if your Jupiter is something that brings you incredible, divine, lucky manifestations, or if your Jupiter is one of those that's been keeping us up at night, like it has been for many Geminis I know. Momo Sable 147, Mimosa Bell, Momo Sable 147 says, I did EMDR therapy last year, and my therapist gave me a list of grounding resources to use if my mind was getting stuck in negative thought spirals. This alphabet technique you talked about with trying to sleep was one of those resources, but with the added layer of categories, which my Virgo stellium found very helpful to narrow in my focus and calm down. As an example, if music artist was the category, I would think Alicia Keys, Beatles, Childish Gambino, Daft Punk, etc. Haven't used that method in a while, but this was a good reminder to start again. Lang 5050 says, with Jupiter Gemini retrograde natally, I am also done and ready for Daddy Fortune to join me for a David Lynch binge in the living room of Cancer. Enough with the incoherent ideas that all beg for my attention. I couldn't have said it better myself. Ryan Yoakum 6912 says, for reals with Jupiter in my first house in Gemini, my mind has been in overdrive this past year. And although I thought it was abundant and magical in the early degrees, now I'm just tired and ready for it to move on. First of all, hi, Ryan. And also, couldn't agree more. Something we're going to talk about in a couple minutes here is about how the first little period of Jupiter and Gemini was really dignified last June because we had Mercury and Venus and the sun also in Gemini. So keep that in mind because that dignity is returning now too. Cocod73 says, thank you, Gemini Sun here. You are the first astrologer who has acknowledged the negative elements of Jupiter and Gemini. This really has not been an easy transit. I was a bit star-eyed at the beginning, not so now. Thank you for adding to the conversation and providing me with more food for thought. Thank you so much for your commiseration, Cocod, because I have a sixth house Gemini Sun. And I thought, wow, what a luxurious and expansive relationship I'll have to my body after this transit. All right, jumping into our transits. As I mentioned, we have a couple important ingresses and then just one big transit that I'm going to spend this entire video talking with you guys about. On June 5th, we have Venus entering Taurus. On June 8th, we have Mercury conjunct Jupiter at 29 Gemini. And Mercury will ingress into Cancer, kicking off everything coming over into Cancer and making that last square to Saturn in Aries. The moon, for her part this week, will move from late Leo through late Scorpio. First things first, we have Venus entering Taurus, and mostly ingresses are subtle shifts in the energy, but this one feels really sweet, particularly because Venus has been going through this saga moving forward through Aries, stationing retrograde at the beginning of March, going all the way back through to Pisces, then stationing direct again, moving all the way through Aries. And she's finally done with all of that, moving into her own dignity in her domicile sign of Taurus. So this is Venus coming home. She's dignified. She is slow. She is sensual. I think it's also really beautiful that Venus moves into Taurus while the moon is in Venus ruled Libra. There is a mutual sort of relationship there between the moon in Libra and Venus in Taurus. Libra is Venus's domicile, and Taurus is the sign of the moon's exaltation and also Venus's domicile. So there's some nice synastry between the moon and Venus, and that actually carries out in an interesting way through the end of this week. But for now, think about Venus and Taurus as the feeling of being wrapped up cozy tight in fine linen sheets after the chaos of spring and fighting for the things that you love and dealing with the retrogrades. This is stability. This is a true possibility for stability that's going to like connect and soothe the volatility of the recent stuff that has been happening, particularly in the fixed signs. And it also begins a period of foreshadowing for what Venus will do at the beginning of July when she conjoins Uranus at 29 Taurus. So that's just something to pay attention to. Make sure that you take your time in whatever it is that you are doing for pleasure and for fun this week. That brings us to June 8th with the transit I am most excited about for this Gemini season. We have Mercury conjoining Jupiter at 29 degrees Gemini, and this really feels a little bit like a closing statement from Jupiter about and in regards to its chaotic and sort of messy and multi-hyphenate and sometimes scatterbrained stay in Gemini. So last week we talked about how Jupiter in Gemini has felt a little bit like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And this week we're kind of getting into that really feeling like a magic word. This is the final bright flare from Jupiter in Gemini. It's delivering Jupiter's last report before it moves into Cancer, the sign of its exaltation, which we're all really excited about. But Mercury, the messenger, is dignifying Jupiter here in Gemini. So this is kind of an echo of last June's Mercury Jupiter activity. There's some loop here that began last June. So think about particularly the first few days of June 2024. There was a Venus Cazimi. Mercury, Jupiter, the Sun, and Venus were all together in Gemini. What was going on for you then? Can you tie it back there? There was also a total lunar eclipse on December 21st, 2010. Maybe there's something to be tied back to there. Now, I know that date is sort of a while back, but it also happened at 29 Gemini. So just think about maybe how what's going on now kind of ties back or relates there. But let's talk for a minute about the anaretic degree of Gemini. It's hard for me a little bit to take the themes that we usually associate with anaretic degrees, which is fatedness, spookiness, crisis, these cliffside thresholds where life will never be the same on the other side. It's a little hard to translate that into the Gemini Sagittarius axis, which is full of such buffoonery and levity and clowning, frankly. So when I think about this and we're thinking about what is the anaretic degree of Gemini like, that 29 Gemini, the 30th degree, it is a high speed intellectual threshold. I think that is maybe the edgiest that Gemini really gets. It is words pouring out faster than your body can catch them. It is the mind lashing through the noise like a whip. It has some frenetic energy, some frantic energy, and it is brain worrying, late night churning, sort of like the moment when you've pulled an all nighter and you've jammed so much energy into your brain and you sit down to take the test and you're like in the flow state of that study that you've done and you're almost channeling more than you are even recalling. Because as we know with overnighters, that stuff leaves your brain immediately after you take the test if you don't get rest. But I'm not here to lecture you on the importance of rest, even though Venus is in Taurus, my friends. But this really is a trickster degree, a translator. There's some divine chaos going on here when these two meet at 29 Gemini. Now, here's a theme that I really see emerging from this. Every possible truth exists. You just have to find the right shelf. So, what do I mean by that? You may have heard this come across cynically, as in the Beatles, there's nothing you can do that hasn't been done, or every good idea that you have has already been thought of someone else. But we're not thinking about it cynically today. We're thinking about it optimistically because Jupiter is involved and because Mercury, the trickster, is involved, breaking the fourth wall and winking at the camera. So, this Mercury Jupiter at 29 Gemini feels a little to me like wandering the endless hexagons of Jorge Luis Borges's Library of Babel. Now, for those unfamiliar, this is a short story and it is about 7 pages long. The premise of this short story is that the universe is an endless series of hexagonally shaped rooms in a library. And in this library, every book is written by randomly ordering the characters of a language, of an alphabet. The idea is that because the library is truly infinite, you can search room after room after room after room. And because of the concept of true infinity, you would eventually find a high fidelity rendering of a Shakespeare manuscript. You would eventually find a high fidelity rendering of the literary epic that is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. You would find any book that you are looking for because of the nature of infinite permutations. So the idea here is like a little bit about the boundlessness and the seemingly unrewarding, endless trudgery that is seeking, finding, working through knowledge. But the twist here, a little bit for us, for our spiritual purposes, is that we don't always find pages just because we search harder. Sometimes the architecture of luck and divinity is such that we find those pages of coherent text. We get those synchronicities, we open the book, and we see for once that we are holding a manuscript that is true, that has words that we understand and can scrutinize in it, and it makes sense to us. And sometimes that just happens as a pure synchronicity. So this is tied in for me because I have this idea that every combination of words already exists. That is total gibberish, Gemini overload, Jupiter and Gemini experience right there. But Jupiter's final moment here with Mercury in dignity offers us a thread of coherence. It's a manuscript we can understand. This is like sacred nonsense, okay? Sense that is masquerading as nonsense, sense that is masquerading as noise. And because our brains are going to be able to move quite quickly here at the anaretic degree of Gemini and frantically, we may be able to snatch from the library the exact manuscript that we need at the time that we need it. So think to yourself, what information have you been walking past with Jupiter and Gemini again and again and again and just not recognizing its form? Because Borges says the library contains everything. But here, this conjunction is going to reveal to us the most useful page that we need. Okay, I want to throw one other idea at you for this Mercury Jupiter conjunction because Mercury and Jupiter are oppositional. What do I mean by that? In the dignity scheme, Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo, and Jupiter rules Sagittarius and Pisces. Those signs you may notice are opposite one another. Virgo is opposite Pisces, and Sagittarius is opposite Gemini. So there are some ways in which Jupiter and Mercury have opposite ideas and opposite agendas. Jupiter, we could say, loves to go big and be visionary and go more, 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 expand and go wider. Mercury, on the other hand, often likes to go smaller, inward, details, receipts. If we think about the joy scheme, Jupiter finds its joy in the 11th house of good spirit. And that's indicative of the fact that Jupiter is always yearning, wanting, hoping for more, bigger, other, and always seeking. Whereas Mercury takes its joy at the helm of the ship in the first house, right here in our bodies, not elsewhere, not where we're yearning, not where we are finding ourselves full of optimism or ambition, but right here in our bodies, in our everyday lives. So, this is kind of bringing up this disparity between them, and this very productive tension between them is really making me think of the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, a concept I will reveal I have tattooed on my body. It's something I think of all the time, but it seems really present here with Mercury and Jupiter meeting just before they both shift signs into Cancer, mind you. This is a final mirror check. So, what's going on in real life versus what's going on in my brain? What's going on in the domestic world around me versus what's going on in divine reality? Where is my body right now versus where are my hopes for the future? Mercury is this planet of correspondence. It's touching Jupiter. Jupiter is so divine. It's so big. It's so optimistic. So, this really feels like a moment of interaction and maybe even a little kiss between what's here now and what's small and what's out there for us and what's big. So, in a year where not much has made sense, this might be a moment of equilibrium where we can see the complementary natures of what's above and what's below. Think about this moment as like a tuning fork that is sort of harmonizing between the as above and the so below. And just after this conjunction, we have Mercury on the 8th moving into Cancer. So we have this shift from Mercury from its domicile of Gemini into the water sign of Cancer. That intellect is going to be moving into a place of deep feeling where thinking will become remembering and messages might transmute into memory. The interesting thing here is that Mercury is really dignified when it meets Jupiter and Gemini. They both slide over into Cancer. Jupiter goes in the very next day on June 9th, on Monday, June 9th, and Jupiter is actually exalted in Cancer. So we're moving from a place of strong mercurial dignity to a place of strong Jupiterian dignity. This is kind of echoing back into that as above, so below. So definitely have a think about that. We're going to talk a lot more about Mercury moving into Cancer next week. It does happen at the end of this week, but I think the big story there, of course, is moving into the square with Saturn with Jupiter. But just know that this is the beginning of a really long summer of nice transits. A lot of what has happened in the past year, in the past few years, has been really difficult. But the past year with Jupiter in Gemini and Saturn in Pisces has felt really stuck across the mutable signs. And the mutable signs are the places where we are the most used to compromising and being flexible. So for a grand cross at times, and at least that big square, especially for anyone with mutable placements, has been playing out. It's been really stuck. Now, we also had a long, hard winter of Mars Pluto drama, the Mars retrograde, and then the not as challenging, but not necessarily pleasant experience of a simultaneous Venus and Mercury retrograde and eclipse and solstice in Aries. It's been a lot. So, as things move into Cancer, we actively get into a more positive part of the year, and that continues to unfold all through late fall, where we have a series of grand trines. It's going to be pretty good. The moon, for her part this week, moves from Leo through Scorpio. So the moon is in Virgo while Mercury is in Gemini. That's pretty sweet. And then the moon moves into Libra as Venus enters Taurus, again, adding to that sweetness. Now, once the moon enters Scorpio, tension sort of rises a little bit. And what's interesting is that the moon and Venus and Uranus are still in contact across the fixed signs. So Mars is in late Leo, Pluto's in early Aquarius, the moon is in Scorpio, and Venus and Uranus are in Taurus. So, in a sign based way, they are still activating that same tired old story of the Mars Pluto oppositions. It started in January. It happened again in April. Then we had the full moon in Scorpio in May. And now this is that spiral path of astrology. It's coming back again. It's slightly different players, and it is happening in a looser aspect. It's not necessarily by degree, but in a sign based way, it is still playing out. So if that is something that you haven't resolved, This is our fourth or fifth spiral pass for you to try to get that handled. Whatever was going on through the Mars Pluto, through that full moon in Scorpio, the spooky springtime Halloween full moon in Scorpio, this is maybe for real one of your last chances because Mars is about to move out of Leo. It's also interesting because what the moon and Venus are doing together, and maybe, Mars and Pluto, is kind of happening in aversion to what's going on in Gemini and Aries. And Gemini and Aries are collaborating via sextile right now. So it's just kind of interesting, two disparate pages. If you're listening to what I'm saying and you're like, yeah, I'm definitely still on the fixed sign track, I'm definitely still reeling from the Mars Pluto, maybe that's something you need to handle this week. On the other hand, if you're feeling that Geminian supercalifragilisticexpialidocious optimism, this is definitely a week to harness that. Put a harness on that dragon. Okay, we've reached the section of the show where I talk about how I, as a human, pagan, animist astrologer, use the astrology of this week. So Venus is my time lord for just one more week until my birthday on June 12th. So I'm definitely going to do something sweet for Venus as she enters Taurus. Venus has been so good to me this year as a Time Lord and has taught me a really staggering amount of lessons about joy and beauty and art. And because she rules my 10th house of Libra, in whose perfection year I currently stand, I've learned a lot about the ways that I can incorporate authenticity and my artistic practice and knowledge into my work. You guys are all the lucky benefactors of that. So offer Venus some honey on my behalf or go to a nice cafe on a Friday with no other goals but to have a sweet time and to treat yourself. Now, for the Mercury Jupiter conjunction, I have a couple ideas. My main idea that I have done for a few other transits like this is to relive my year in a ritualistic and reflective way. So, what I do is I actually go through my journals, I go through my photos apps, I go through my emails, and I kind of actually just make a bullet point note for everything that I find is remarkable for the entire year. And I actually just do a little audit and remind myself. This helps me in a couple ways. Now, usually this is helping me to correct for how hard I am on myself, and I'm able to kind of recognize my accomplishments. But I actually think I need this year because I have my son Mercury in Gemini, and this Jupiter transit has been freaking strange, overwhelming, chaotic, and very messy for me. I have had so many learning projects fall into my lap. It's been kind of insane. And I've also had a lot of health and body discovery falling into my lap. So my goal is to go back through my year and take a candid audit sometime before this Mercury Jupiter to try to get a sense of some themes, maybe kind of work out a narrative that I can tell myself about this year and what it's been like. I'm probably going to use my solar return chart and go back over that and the transits to just kind of see how it played out for me as well. In addition to that, Mercury and Jupiter both have quite godly orientations and signification. So, Mercury is obviously the messenger who travels between the underworld and this world we live in and the heavens, collecting messages from the gods and channeling them. Jupiter is also associated with spirituality and God and divinity and seeking. So I am definitely going to be making myself receptive in a ritual way on that day. I haven't quite decided which deity I might reach out to. Obviously, I could reach out to Hermes or Mercury. I could reach out to Thor, who I work with a lot, or Jupiter, the archetype. I haven't totally decided yet. The sun is always in the mix because I love Apollo and my sun is in Gemini. If you're interested in more of that and how I plan for that ritual and how I'll be using it, definitely visit me on Instagram or sign up for my newsletter. All right, friends, don't forget whatever is happening to you this week. We are in that infinitely unfolding library of incoherence, but all it takes is a moment of true alignment to find the one manuscript that makes sense for you and that works for you. And I'm not talking about some random alignment, some random woo technique. I am just actually talking about sitting in your real life, sitting in the present moment and trusting whatever it is that you trust. If you need help making sense of what Jupiter has done in Gemini for you, you can book a session with me at 9livesastrology.com. I'm currently booking for late June. I would love to talk through it with you. Maybe you can help talk it through with me. And if this week hits you with an awesome, incredible synchronicity, drop it in the comments below. I would love to hear what Mercury Jupiter delivered for you at that anaretic, spooky degree of buffoonery in Gemini. And you know what that sound means. I am done with my coffee, and so the show must be done as well. Until next time, tend to your altars, trust your senses, try to live in the present moment. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Monday.